on the cancel culture idea, which cancel culture has been an ongoing phenomenon of this idea that you gather people together to boycott something or someone. That was the initial concept of it, is you could make something or someone go away by pushing sponsors to drop out of it, those sorts of things. It got worse when they started attacking the employers of folks, so that you canceled people more directly by firing them. And it's been taken over very much in corporate culture, large corporate culture, where if you say anything that causes any ruffled feathers, you get canceled. One of the good examples would be I should know which paper it was. It was either New York Times or the Post. Anyway, had Tom Cotton, one of the senators, write a op-ed piece that was written about whether or not we should bring in the military to help out in unrest, the Black Lives Matter, Antifa-based unrest that's been going on in Portland and Seattle and places like that. And he wrote about the fact that we needed to get control of that, whatever. The big thing is corporate-wise, inside that newspaper's internal workings of their writers and so forth, they got all huffy that somebody they disagreed with was given a platform to speak. They didn't want to have to give a logical difference of opinion. They didn't want to have to debate what he had to say. How dare somebody you disagree with even be given the platform? And then there was a push to fire editors who'd allowed it, and I think there was an editor who stepped back and so forth, and it's led down the road. One of the editors who called for firings got fired yesterday, and it's this thing. It's interesting. So you've had that aspect of it, and then of course the one that made the most news recently was Amazon basically canceling Parler. That one's huge, and I just had an interesting thought today. So I was watching. If you want to know who I watch right now, the person I think on television who's most interesting, who has the most thoughtful things to say about what's going on in the country right now, I think is Tucker Carlson. I think he's really risen up. When Bill O'Reilly turned out to be a human being with flaws, and some of them flaws that come with power and those sorts of things, so we had to cancel him and shove him out of the way. But I had thought all along that he was one of the most intelligent voices out there. Not a conservative voice, a much more middle-of-the-road voice, but that wasn't acceptable by the left at all. But I thought he, along with individuals like Rush Limbaugh, have been the most unique in their ability to see something and say something that mattered to me. Say it in a way that I'd go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Tucker Carlson's like that right now. I've been trying lately to catch his opening monologue. And it's funny because in the conservative stuff that you would read, like Red State or Breitbart or something like that, Tucker Carlson's opening monologue is printed as news almost every day right now, which is interesting. It tells me that his voice is rising to the top of things. So I'm sure we're digging through his past like crazy and finding some reason to cancel him. But one of the things that was pointed out right now is there's a piece of legislation that was just put forth that would basically codify cancel culture. And there was actually two of them, I think, that were sitting there. I didn't catch every word of it. But one of them was an idea brought up by a member of government that said the backgrounds of people who serve in government should be questioned on thought stuff. Have you ever belonged to a group that advocated insurrection? But what the hell are the definitions that they're going about? Their definitions are crazy definitions, because right now they would cancel the entire Republican Party if they could, because they think senators meet that definition. And so that was one of them. One of the other things that he laid out in there was a bunch of stuff, a bunch of it had aired on CNN, a big discussion about whether or not there should, this concept that there should there even be a platform for people you disagree with, and that because it's disruptive to the country, we should eliminate the platforms, and included in the platforms that are listed is Fox News, which is insane because most of us who are truly conservative folks think Fox News isn't that far out there much of the time. Okay, you've got Hannity, you've got a couple of guys who are solidly conservative, people I don't agree with all of the time, but no, for the most part, their straight news stuff and so forth has not even been reliably conservative. But we want to, because they disagree with CNN or whatever, it's shocking to me that CNN would advocate for the elimination of them. And it's funny because I think it's not funny. They rely a lot on you being stupid. They talk about things like the fairness doctrine, the idea that at one time there was a fairness committee that oversaw whether or not television was fair and balanced stuff. The thing they leave out, because they think you're not going to know this, is it didn't cover cable news. It only covered broadcast news, and that's on this old school idea that the airwaves are limited and they belong to us nationally and the national government, so they have control over divvying out who can use those airwaves. And so on that basis, they were going to keep them fair, and that went away. But they're suggesting it should be brought back as though that would affect Fox News. That would be a whole different thing if they were trying to say Fox News can or can't say these things on a private platform like cable networks, which is private property. That would be a level of impact that we've never seen in this country. I mean, that's absolutely fascist dictatorial control over thought. And that gets me all stirred up. But the interesting thing, while all of that discussion was going on, that I had that made me feel better was how stinking un-American it is. Now, you would think that would make me mad, but no. One of the things that I taught my students when in building businesses was a concept that I gave a word to. I invented a word called frenestic. Frenestic means to agree with human nature. That if you start a business, it should agree with human nature. If you build a business that requires people to be something other than what they are to buy your product, you'll fail. So the example in the past, until very recently they've sorted out, but in the past until now, expecting people to spend huge amounts of money for really crappy electric cars was not a winning bid, because expected people to buy them purely because they cared about the planet so much or whatever, that they were going to spend strangely large amounts of money for little crap box cars. And that doesn't work because people aren't better than that. People don't care enough. People have other things that impact them that are based upon human nature, like what does my car say about me and things like that. Well, this whole thing, Americans, there is definitely an American nature. And one of the things that is very American nature is rebelling against the system. And this idea that through social media deciding what we can talk about and going through, and they're now anybody who's involved with QAnon's going to be canceled, but they don't define what involved with is. Does that mean if you've ever, forwarded a tweet, whatever the hell I don't do Twitter, but if you follow, if you've linked, is all of that make you a bad person? I mean, I read things that I don't agree with. How dare I do that? But I'm not willing to let you say that's what I believe just because I read something. That's absurd. That's crazy. And I think a huge part of what America is the more you tell us we can't do something, the more likely it is we're going to do it. And I think that wins out. I think you cannot defeat an idea as big as the guiding principles of what conservatives are by silencing them, by cutting off Parler or by shutting them down on Twitter or by whatever. What you're setting up is what Fox News did. Conservatives have been pushed out of the world of television news discussion, and what it left was a giant opening for a guy to come along and build this massive thing that became Fox News. I think the same thing is sitting there. I think the more that it's there, the more you just push me. When I was in college, I did a lot of theater, and did theater after I was in college. Did it as a job. And the interesting thing is the theater world is one of the terms you hear a lot is edgy. They like being edgy. And you'd go to theater festivals and these sorts of things, and at that time, this is early 90s to late 90s, edgy was all about homosexuality. So every other play you saw had naked gay stuff going on in it. Every play opened with two guys, kissing. I mean, it was just constant. That's all it was. And we even had this concept of the gay play. There was a play called Jeffrey, which, if you want to look it up, I would call that the quintessential gay play. Why? Because that's all it was meant to do, is be in your face, to say you're going to see this no matter what. And it was interesting. But I was really, one of the things I came to understand was that it was this whole world of people trying to be edgy, and yet they were all the same edge. That there's only one edge. Try doing something conservative. And we did. I went to a Christian university, and we went to the American College Theater Festival with a play that was about family values, an old school play about traditional values in the face of a world trying to encourage them to be more modern day concept of liberal. And we got bashed for it. It was interesting because that wasn't acceptable. It goes back to the kids in school, the counterculture kids who don't want to be like anybody else. So they all dress in black, and they look exactly the same. They're the same. They're just a different group of people, and they're just as hard to fit into, and they're just as unaccepting of people who aren't like them, and they are just a different clique. They're not anti-clique. They're just their own clique. Well, I think that is quintessential to who we are and what we are, and I think the more they try to squash everything they disagree with, half this country is not going to be squashed because of a social media disappearing. I'd be willing to bet you a significant number of people who made up the 75 million people who voted for Trump don't give a crap about social media. They're like me. I've been suspect of it from day one, and I have only these very light touches to it. You can't find my personal Facebook profile because I don't have one. And so shutting me out of those things is not terribly effective because I wasn't there anyway. We find a way to keep going, carrying on anyway. And so I tried to find some positives in all this, and I think that's one of them.